So let's talk about Joe Scarborough today, who the MSNBC's version of a conservative, who today became the latest old white man to get upset because black people are no longer standing up for the latent racism that's been going on for too long in this country in the wake of these Michael Brown and Sean Bell and the guy that got shot in Walmart and Trayvon Martin incidents, in which has just basically been open season on black males pretty much since Obama took office. I wonder if it's some sort of connection to that. But anyway, on Joe Scarborough's show today, he went on some tirade because the St. Louis Rams had the audacity to join in the protests, the Ferguson protests. They did a hands up, don't shoot salute. And of course, you know, because some white people can't stand any sort of racial stress or any challenge to their authority, all-knowing authority. It just sent Joe Scarborough over the edge. So first of all, the meme that's going around in the right-wing media that they shouldn't do this because Darren Wilson was exonerated. He wasn't exonerated of anything. All the grand jury found was that there was not enough people on the grand jury to get an indictment. For all we know, a majority of the grand jury might have agreed that Darren Wilson was completely wrong, but it only took 4 holdouts. And on a jury with 6 white men, I'm sure that wasn't difficult to achieve, especially with the prosecutor determined to act as Darren Wilson's defense attorney. So with all the evidence released, we see that 16 of 18 witnesses said Mike Brown had his hands up when he was murdered by Darren Wilson. So the idea that what the Rams players did was out of bounds, first of all, that's not true. Second of all, this assertion on Joe Scarborough's show that Michael Brown is a thug, which is the meme du jour going around with conservative whites. Well, Michael Brown was not a thug. What Michael Brown was a teenager, a stupid one who made stupid teenage mistakes like all teenagers, black, white, red, and indifferent, or most of all teenagers tend to do. But for some reason, when black kids make these mistakes that, you know, teenagers make, drug experimentation, you know, stealing, whatever teenagers do, then conservative old white men and racists like to use as an excuse to strip black kids of their humanity. White kids who make these mistakes are still fully human. They still get to be kids. They still get to grow up and mature. But for some reason, the minute black kids, you know, act like a kid, make a mistake, we don't get a chance to grow up. That means that we should be shot down in the middle of the street. And calling Michael Brown a thug because he was a teenager who made teenage mistakes is just one more attempt by the powers that be, basically right-wing old white men like Joe Scarborough in this country, to strip young black males of all of their humanity. We don't get to be human, fully human. We either have to be magic Negroes and saints, or to the extent that we are human and make mistakes, then that means we're thugs who deserve to die. Which, of course, is a very curious way for people to think in 2014. But fortunately, Ferguson has exposed that many people still think that way, like Joe Scarborough. Michael Brown was no more of a thug than Mitt Romney, who grew up bullying and beating up gay kids. But for white people, conservative white people, that's presidential material. He was no more a thug than George W. Bush, who couldn't stay out of trouble as a teenager. But again, that's presidential material. They get to grow up. It's not okay for them to get murdered in the streets. If a black kid had done the same things they did, well, they deserve to die, according to a certain subset of white folks in this country. Michael Brown was no more a thug than Laura Bush, who became First Lady, even though she was a drunk driver who got someone killed in her younger days. Now, if Michael Brown had done that, you wouldn't hear the end of it about how horrible a person he was, who deserved to die. But a white girl does it. She's, you know, that's just a young person making mistakes, and she's not a thug. My friends in college, you know, my white friends, they would steal street signs for shits and giggles. They would, steal movie posters. They weren't thugs, rightfully so. They weren't considered thugs. They were just considered boys being boys, growing pains, stupid kids being stupid kids. If I had done the same thing to let Scarborough tell it, I'd be a thug who deserved to die. So this whole Mike Brown is a thug thing, it's a good thing, actually, that he wasn't a saint, because he demonstrates the fact that black people are human. We're not saints. We make mistakes. But that doesn't mean that we deserve to be murdered in the street when we're fleeing with our hands up, as his word, according to 16 of the 18 grand jury witnesses. And the final point that needs to be addressed about Joe Scarborough, well, 2 points. The fact that he said 95% of Americans agree with him. Well, I can make up statistics too, Joe Scarborough, and I think 95% of Americans think you're an idiot. So there goes my statistical, nonsense of the day. 95% of the American people are not old white racists, and I'm pretty sure that they don't agree with you. And the last point is that someone, I don't know if it was Joe or one of his guests, made the statement that all of this doesn't reflect well on the black community, which of course, again, is, the real problem, with what's going on in this country. The behavior of a few black people doesn't reflect well on the entire black community, millions and millions of people. 97% of black people are law-abiding citizens, which you wouldn't know it listening to people like Joe Scarborough and the other people in the corporate media who have an agenda to, again, strip black people of their humanity, of their chance to be human, which, I, as a black male, am no longer going to put up with. And I think that Ferguson is a turning point where black people and Latinos and Asian people and white people who get it are no longer just going to stand for that sort of demonization. Michael Brown was not a thug. He was not a demon. He was a human being. And the ability of certain white people to see that is the issue. So what doesn't reflect well on white people, on the white community, is the fact that the KKK was colluding with the police to escalate these protests. I don't think that reflects well on you, Joe Scarborough, and white people. So why don't you address that? Let's address some white thuggery. I doubt you have the intellectual honesty to do that. Have a good day. This has been a word from Dude Kembrো.